Hi, and welcome back to our Power of Words and Language series. Today I'm going to talk about sensuality and sexuality. These are words often used interchangeably, wrongly, often though there's a good reason for that. And sensuality is often used when sexuality is meant on social media because of the draconian, prudish laws that govern platforms like this one. So I'm taking a risk even saying the word sexuality or writing it in my post, because somebody's going to look at that and I might be corrupting the minds of the youth. But putting that aside, these two words shouldn't be used interchangeably. So to kick us off, we'll start as usual with a dictionary definition. So we look at the simplistic Google dictionary one first, just because it puts it in context. So they say it's the enjoyment, expression, or pursuit of physical, especially sexual pleasure. Now, as I've said, that's often used interchangeably with sexuality for reasons to do with censorship, basically. And the synonyms given for sensuality on the Google dictionary also cause some difficulty in my view, because they say eroticism, possibly. Physicality, yes, that's closer. Passion, okay. But then they use sexuality as a synonym. I say, but it isn't. Perhaps the opposite is more helpful, and that's asceticism. Asceticism, where you forego, you spurn the pleasures of the flesh, as it's called. Merriam-Webster's dictionary is probably a lot more helpful here. So please forgive me throughout as I refer to my notes here, because I want to make sure we get this right, because it's an important topic. They define sensuality as relating to or consisting in the gratification of the senses or the indulgence of appetite, fleshly, devoted to or preoccupied with the senses or appetites. And they use synonyms like voluptuous. Now, they also refer to the fact that sometimes this word sensuality is used to imply that you are deficient in moral, spiritual, or intellectual interest. And again, I want to take that on. They use synonyms like worldly or irreligious. And again, that's relevant, but mistaken in my view. Now let's skip quickly to the definition of sexuality. Now, that's the capacity for sexual feelings. So rather than a person's identity in relation to the gender or genders to which they are typically attracted. So sexuality, they, in the Google dictionary, use synonyms, unfortunately for our case here, of sensuality, which we're talking about, sexiness, desirability. Now, a more helpful definition is, your sexuality is the way in which people experience and express themselves sexually. And it's a product of a range of factors. It's a product of biology, conditioning, experience, emotions, convention. It's partly innate and partly developed. So we want to start from that point in terms of what I want to say. Because really what I'm getting at by looking at these two words is to encourage you, for a bunch of reasons which I'm about to explain, to embrace sensuality and to understand sexuality for yourself and for others. And so what I'd like to talk about quickly in the context of sensuality is your sensuality is a sexual signature, or as a sexual signature is the ability to fully experience one's senses: smell, taste, sight, touch, hearing. And what sensuality does, particularly in the sexual context, but all around, is get us out of our heads and into our bodies. That's what sensuality is really about. And in that context, if you take it in that way, it's a form of meditation. What is meditation? Nothing really more than getting in touch with your awareness. What is awareness? If you ask the question, what am I aware of in the moment? The only things you can be truly aware of in the moment are that information provided to you by your senses, by what you can see, taste, smell, touch, or hear. And so your immediate presence, the real in the moment now, your awareness is sensual. It is sensuality. And so embracing sensuality is a form of meditation. It's a form of pure awareness. Now, obviously, sensuality goes further than that because it implies that you take pleasure in that. And why would you not? So, it's a way, being in touch with your sensuality, embracing it, is a way of increasing your sexual energy and confidence. Now, there are 4 types of intimacy, and there's a fantastic blog post on this, and that you can find on Instagram, which I'll put in the notes in the post here, by Alyssa Marie Wellness, who identifies 4 types of intimacy. And these are emotional intimacy, mental intimacy, spiritual intimacy, and physical intimacy. Now, of course, physical intimacy is enhanced and developed through sensuality. It's entirely based on it. And so what I want you to consider when considering sensuality is sensuality relates firstly to pleasure. And pleasure is good. So much of what we address in the whole self-empowerment, wellness, well-being movement, the self-help world, is to embrace our suffering, to learn from our pain. But you can equally learn from your pleasure, because what do we want from life really other than pleasure? It's perverse in a sense to want anything more than that or other than that. And sensuality is a way of truly embracing pleasure in the most present possible way, because it comes from the senses, which, as I said, when you tune into those, you can be in nothing other than the moment. And so sensuality relates to pleasure. Sensuality also relates to intimacy. Intimacy is good. Intimacy is good because it develops connection. We are wired for connection. The more intimate our relationships, generally, the better they are. The more they serve us, and the more we're able to serve those that we're connected with. And sensuality, the ability to give and receive sensual pleasure, including sex, but also comfort, hugs, touch, the smell of somebody you love, the sight of somebody you love, the voice of somebody you love in hearing. These are all beautiful ways of developing both pleasure and intimacy. And those are sensual. Those come from your sensuality. Your sensuality also, of course, relates to eroticism. And this is good. Eroticism is good because sexual connection, sexual intimacy, is the greatest and closest and most vulnerable form of intimacy that we can enjoy with another person. And that's a good thing, because connection is created through sexuality, through eroticism. And eroticism, for many of us, is fed by our sensuality, by our senses, what we see, what we touch, what we smell, what we hear. And that's a good thing. Embrace it. Finally, sensuality relates to spirituality. In other words, being in touch with your body, being in touch with your senses, by embracing sensuality, you begin to recognize the symptoms of emotions before they overwhelm you. And what so much of spirituality is about is overcoming the control that thoughts and emotions exercise over our lives. That's what awareness is about. That's what mindfulness is about. That's why we meditate, is so that we are in touch with our emotions, but not ruled by our emotions. And sensuality is a really, really good way of getting in touch with that. The more we're in touch with our bodies and how they feel, the more we are able to recognize that first physical symptom of an emotion arising. So as something triggers us, as the emotion arises, let's say it's anxiety or it's fear or it's anger, that generally arises first in the physical, somewhere in our bodies. And the more in touch with your body you are, the more conscious you are of where particular emotions or where particular triggers are manifested in you physically by embracing your physicality, your sensuality, the more likely you are to be able to catch it at a moment where you can step aside and consider it objectively and be with it rather than being taken over by it. And so sensuality serves us in all these four areas: pleasure, intimacy, eroticism, and spirituality. Now, let's move on to consider the realm of sexuality here. Sensuality is simply one of the 5 elements or aspects of sexuality. So I'm going to take you through what those are. If we consider sensuality, physicality as one element of sexuality, what are the others? Well, I've covered a couple already in a sense. The first is intimacy. That's caring, sharing, loving, your vulnerability, liking somebody. And as I've said, there are 4 types of intimacy, and I took you through those in the notes from Alyssa Marie Wellness, which are emotional intimacy, mental intimacy, spiritual and physical intimacy. And so sexuality is tied up in intimacy. Sexual identity is another element of sexuality. And again, I've covered that when we talked about the definition of sexuality. Biological gender, your sex, gender identity, gender role, your sexual orientation is a strong element of sexuality, but not of sensuality. And this is why we should be dealing with these aspects in clear use of language and separately. Because as I say, sensuality is only one aspect of sexuality. And another one of those is sexualization. That's flirting, seduction, images, the things we see. Harassment is an element of sexualization. The media sexualizes things. It demonizes certain aspects of sexuality. It's about hang-ups, it's about rules. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that shortly. And then final aspect of sexuality is a very practical one, which is sexual health and reproduction. That's about anatomy and physiology, reproductive systems, contraception, abortion, sexually transmitted infections. These are all elements of sexuality. And so using sensuality to describe sexuality does a disservice to the concept of sexuality, and that's why I was so keen to draw this distinction today. And why I felt I needed to do this power of words so that we understand all this. And I'll come on to my main point in a second. If you realize that there are terms that describe sexual attraction or behavior and orientation, when I looked into this, I found, before I gave up, to be totally honest, 46 different terms that are used to describe some aspect of sexual attraction or orientation or behavior. So sexuality has to do with the way you identify, how you experience sexual and romantic attraction. And of course, not everybody does, right? There are asexual people, which is one of the 46 terms I came across. So not everybody does, but if you do experience sexual or romantic attraction, your sexuality describes your interest in and preferences around sexual and romantic relationships. And so they then govern your behavior. Your sexuality will govern how you manifest these things. And it can be fluid, it changes. I know for myself it has over time in terms of what turns me on, what works for me. And that must be true of everybody, particularly as you mature from your teen years through into your adulthood, and then of course beyond that. So there are a bunch of terms. So when I say 46, I'm obviously not going to go through all 46, but we're talking about terms that are like asexual, demisexual, closeted, bi-curious, androsexual, gay, bi, lesbian. As I say, I found 46 of these things. It's not important what they are. What is important is really the conclusion that I wanted to draw from all of this. And the first, I hope, came through in when I was talking more specifically about sensuality, which is allow yourself, give yourself permission to become more sensual for all the reasons I outlined around the good it does for you for your pleasure, your intimacy, your eroticism, your spirituality, the expression of your sexuality, getting in touch with your body. The negative connotations of sensuality, being worldly or irreligious, frankly, fuck 'em. There's much more to be gained here within our short, beautiful life from embracing the sensual than from shunning it. So please, that's the point I wanted to make around sensuality. Embrace it. Enjoy it. It's a beautiful thing. And then I want to encourage you to understand and embrace sexuality, your own, but hopefully free yourself to give full expression to your sexuality, but also for others to create a better world. Embrace how a person's sexuality or their asexuality manifests, because one way or a very narrow band of ways is not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It's not better or worse. As long as the people involved have freely consented to what's going on, it's really not your problem. It's not your problem. It's not the law's problem. It's not society's problem. It's not the pastor's problem. It's not God's problem. It's not the universe's problem. It's not your problem. It's somebody's sexuality, and how that manifests with another freely consenting person is only relevant to the two people engaged. Embrace that in yourself and others, and just come from a place of love and compassion for yourself and others. And I really hope that helped.